Welcome to the joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Redevelopment Agency. May we have a roll call for the City Council, please?
Council members: Raymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Quintero.
Here.
And could we have a roll call for the agency, please?
Agency members: Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Draymond.
Here.
Mr. Clerk, may we have your report?
Certainly. The agenda for the March 9th, 2010 joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, March 4th, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Could you read one into the record, please?
Item before you is Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing regarding proposed Broadway lofts and entertainment development to be located at 200 East Broadway. At 1A is agency motion approving Stage 1 design review, subject to comments and conditions of the city's principal urban designer and the agency.
Mr. Starbird.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll go to Phil Lanza Fame for the staff report. Phil.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, Mr. Chairman, members of the Redevelopment Agency, we have before you for a design review of a very exciting project on the former Circuit City location. It is a mixed-use project that has 248 studio loft units, ranging in size from 361 feet to 481 square feet. On the ground floor is restaurant and indoor entertainment use. It will have on-site parking for residential uses at a 1-to-1 ratio, and then commercial parking will take advantage of prior agreements with that property for parking in the Marketplace garage. It is one of the first mixed income projects that we have. It is proposed to be to have an affordable component to it. It's being done privately, not in conjunction with the Housing Authority. It's also one of the first projects in the Downtown Specific Plan to be a mixed income and taking advantage of both our incentives in that specific plan as well as those allowed by SB 1818. We'll talk about those a little bit more. The concept is to target a demographic between the ages of 18 and 34 years old that will be a user, if you will, of our downtown, specifically the entertainment district that the Redevelopment Agency and City Council had identified between Harvard and Wilson. This is a Stage 1 design review. We're asking you to focus on scale, mass, and site planning. We'll say that there are a lot of different things that are going into the mix here, including our incentive. This project, at least on paper here, is proposing to use our green incentive, that is to achieve LEED Silver for additional density and height. Because of the unique nature of this project, it raises a lot of issues, challenges, if you will, with CEQA, with our DSP standards, as well as how to apply them in conjunction with SB 1818 benefits. The reason for that is because SB 1818 doesn't directly translate to our DSP standards. In our DSP, density is not measured by maximum units per acre, as it traditionally is and elsewhere around the city. Rather, it's measured by a number of standards layered on top of each other, like floor area ratio, open space, height, setbacks, and minimum unit size. Our city attorneys here are available if you need a primer on SB 1818, how it's applied. We explained it in our staff report, but if there are any questions, they're here for you. I guess in final comment before introducing the development team, in considering the mass, scale, and site planning, you should be asking yourselves, are you comfortable with the unit size and its potential effects on those elements? With respect to the unit size, I will add that the developer has started, and staff has started to think of a what if they're not able to attract that demographic, what happens, and the developer has some ideas on how we might be able to enlarge units to create more traditional apartment units. Unless there's any questions from staff at this point, I'll close that introduction and then introduce Greg Parker.
Yeah, before you do,
Okay.
why don't we have the legal staff just give the public an idea of what SB 1818 means?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and members of the agency. Michael Garcia from the City Attorney's Office. Senate Bill 1818 amended Government Code Section 65915 and required cities and counties to provide additional incentives to developers who provide affordable housing on site. In particular, the law requires that cities grant a density bonus based on a formula depending on how much affordability there is, how many units are affordable, and what that income targeting group is, and then also requires additional incentives, basically relaxation of development standards as it applies to a particular development. The legislation, as it applies to this particular project, would require a density bonus of 25% over the maximum allowable residential density. That's based on the fact that they are proposing 7% of the units to be affordable to very low-income households. In addition, it requires at least one incentive to be given to the project. One issue that Phil referenced and that we explained in the staff report is the translation of those SB 18 standards to a project in the downtown specific plan area, because of the fact that we do not have maximum units per acre as we do in other areas of the city. It is our view that the way to establish the maximum allowable residential density for a site in the district in the DSP is to measure how many units you could put on a site by using the FAR, the height, the setback, and that calculation is put into the Exhibit 3 in the staff report. And then our view is that you would add the 25% density bonus to that number. So that's, as we indicated, there's some differing opinion as far as how you calculate that density bonus. But I do want to point out that the city does retain the discretion to grant a larger density bonus than we're required to give, if that's the direction of the city, and that direction, that authority is in our municipal code and the state law. So that sort of addresses the density and incentives aspect of the project, and I think a large part of it, I agree with Mr. Lanzafame that where the council is on the unit size will probably guide some of that discussion by the council.
Okay. Mr. Weaver?
I want the public to clearly understand this is not a question of us being able to say yes or no. It's being mandated by the state and all their wisdom.
The 25%, yes, we're required to give that.
Okay.
What's discretionary is to grant above and beyond that 25%.
Development standards?
Saying we have to give at least one concession.
So the public understands it's being mandated. We don't have a choice.
And I should add, for the record, the city does have the authority to deny the concession or incentive that's requested by the applicant if we determine that incentive is not necessary to provide, to make those units affordable within the project.
And this is the first time we've heard, if it's financially feasible, if we make it financially unfeasible, we cannot do that. Right?
If our denial of the concession, yes, makes it so that those affordable units they cannot provide those affordable units on site, we would not be able to deny that.
And that's contrary to what we discussed here. All my years here saying that, no, we cannot consider the economics of it. In this case, under 1818, we have to consider the economics in terms of it makes it or doesn't make it, right?
To the extent you want to do something other than approve it, correct?
And with a bonus, it's 173 units, and the project requires 248.
That's correct. That's our view. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Ms. Lanzafame?
If there are no other questions, then I'd like to introduce Greg Parker, who's president of American Multifamily, a developer on this project. Greg.
Thank you, Director Lanzafame. Good afternoon, council members, Mayor.
We'll need your name for the record, Ms. Parker.
My name is Greg Parker. and I am president of American Multifamily.
It was there. Sure where it is in there. Greg, would you just move the mouse?
And to hear the president, you think that
might be a few pairs hanging around. See that? Cuffs.
Will be open. Item 2.
Okay.
Bravo.
Mr. Mayor, I'd ask you to not cut into Mr. Parker's time on my account. Excuse us, we're ready to go again.
Take a vote on it.
All right, we're ready to go.
As the introduction noted, we have 248 studios and lofts. 14 will be at the very low income level. The remainder will be market rate. Our ground floor includes retail and parking. will be subterranean entrance from the alley for the residential, and in the city parking garage for the commercial portion of the project. The ground floor will be interactive with Maryland and Broadway and include sidewalk dining. With past California birth rates, between 500,000 and 600,000 young adults will come of age each year for the next 20 years. With the current economy, many are staying at home, creating pent-up demand, which will be released as the economy improves. And there isn't much room. The 8 largest apartment projects in Glendale are currently 98.67% occupied. Glendale currently has 40,000 young adults. 12,000 have incomes above $50,000 a year. This is our target market. 81% of these are single. They have high expectations, are law-abiding, collaborative and tech-savvy, green-aware, and they want to live downtown. Our amenities will include fitness center, 2 courtyards, an active 26,000 square foot roof deck with conversation areas, barbecues, hot tubs, fire pit, and a dog park, and views of the city lights. Our apartment lobby will be at the same location as the current Circuit City entry. 2/3 of those responding to our national survey stated that they would rather live in a studio than roommate. Our lofts make up half of our units and have the same usable area as large one-bedroom apartments. Our full kitchens with bamboo cabinets, granite countertops, and in-unit combination washer and dryers. This is a condominium quality apartment project. This is not an SRO hotel. SRO hotels don't have our amenities or our parking. Examples of studio apartment projects that have withstood time include this 44-year-old Archstone apartment project in San Francisco, which has 222 studios, is 97% occupied with an average rent of $1,732 a month. This 24-year-old El Greco apartment in Westwood has 110 similar studios, renting at an average of $1,522 a month. It is 99% occupied. Completed last year is Olympic Studios in Santa Monica. It has 165 similar studios and lofts. It is rent controlled with an average of $1,344 a month. It is 97% occupied. Like our project, this project has 1-to-1 parking, which is 85 to 90% utilized. Our project is in the middle of business, hospital, and entertainment centers with 4,500 young urban professional jobs. Public transportation is available from the site to these centers, and we have storage for 75 bikes that can also be used to commute. Many of our tenants will not need a car, and those that do will need it less. The project is designed as an anchor to the city's planned entertainment district. We estimate that our tenants will spend $5.3 million annually in supporting adjacent retail while energizing this important corner and primary street from early morning coffee through late night entertainment. If I were standing here in March 9th of 2007, I would be presenting a 156-unit apartment project with the same 104,000 square foot of apartments that we have in this project. It would have 100 one-bedroom apartments at 600 square feet each, 56 small two-bedroom apartments at 800 square feet each. Using the Southern California average apartment household size of 2.5 people, this example project would have a real density of 390 people. The Olympic Studio project in Santa Monica, which I just showed you, has a combination of studios and lofts like our project. It has a household size of 1.7. If this were true, it stayed true on our project at 248 units, we would have a real density of 290 people, 100 less than the example. We believe our project, reconfigured to meet the financial realities and renter preferences of today's market, will likely have a lower, but certainly not higher density than the 156 unit example. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Parker? Yeah. Let me start by saying I consider myself a young urban professional, Mr. Parker. So I think you've got a good idea. Ms. Friedman.
Just a few little questions. First, in the renderings that you showed of the interiors, was any of that furniture either included or built in?
No. That was all standard furniture that is available in the marketplace today.
Okay. I was just curious. Just in terms of the size of the units, did you run numbers on what would happen if the units were, let's say, 100 square feet bigger each and the building was taller? I mean, is that something you looked at?
What I did look at was in today's market, if we were to take the example that I was just talking about, 100 small one-bedrooms and 56 two-bedrooms, and we had the advantage of today's construction cost, but we were burdened, as we would be with today's financing, which is at best 65-35 debt to equity. We would have to have an average rent for those projects of $2,900 a month.
That was a model where they're twice the size. I'm wondering more about just 100 square feet, let's say, a unit, if you looked at what that does.
That we didn't run those exact numbers, but if we were to, I did run just recently the comparison that I meant, so it would obviously be somewhere between those and what our rents are, which are averaging at LA median income of about $1,375.
Do you propose, is there going to be any kind of a cap on the number of occupants? So let's say it's one of the smaller units. Can 2 or 3 people live there, or is there a way that you're going to control that, or you just assume that that won't happen?
We're certainly going to do what we can within the laws to control that. It isn't our advantage to fill those up, to get more people than should be in the units.
So do you have the ability to set that kind of a restriction in the building?
We certainly do, I think, in terms of permanent residents. Ability to police how many people are there every night is another issue, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Or not questions, but rather, why don't you tell us about the commercial aspect in terms of the restaurant, cafe, and possible tenants for your...
We do have a interest level, and over here at the on your left is a ground floor plan, and we do have interest from both Lucky Strike Lanes and Corner Cafe Bakery, and that particular plan is set up to fit that scenario. And with your approval to move forward, we would certainly work on formalizing those or other tenants that would fit that same profile.
Okay, so currently you have 2 major tenants, let's say, 2 literally anchor tenants that would occupy the ground floor.
Yes.
And the restaurant, cafe would be open to the public, etc.
That's correct.
Other questions for Mr. Parker? Mr. Draymond.
Well, it may seem like an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Coming back to the commercial element that Mayor Quintero was just raising, why would Lucky Strike Lanes be interested in the ground floor of this building, this project?
They have had an interest in getting a Glendale presence. They're certainly, I've made them aware, and I understand they were aware from others that have talked with them about the city's plan for the entertainment district, and they like the demographic.
Thank you. I'd like that demographic too if I were them.
Mr. Parker, as you know better than I, trends come and go in real estate. So have you made provisions to enlarge the units in the event that young urban professionals decide that they want to have kids and move to the suburbs?
Yes, we have, although we don't personally think that's going to happen. The studios have been designed so that they can be converted into one or two bedroom units. It would take 2 studios to make a 1-bedroom and 3 studios to make a 2-bedroom. We can do that without any changes to the structure of the building or any of the in-wall plumbing. So it's pretty much of an interior kind of change, moving some non-structural walls around to be able to accomplish that.
Okay. And then the top floor, as you mentioned, would be open space for the tenants, and in fact would have views of the surrounding downtown. From that particular building currently, as it's proposed, you could probably see all the way to downtown Los Angeles without any impediment.
That's what we believe to be the case, yes.
Any other questions for Mr. Parker?
Yes, actually,
Mr. Draven.
Yes. Mr. Parker, also, in the report, you have made a commitment to LEED Silver.
Yes.
Level. How do you? What are some of the highlights that you plan to bring to this building in order to accomplish that?
I actually have a. We have our lead engineer here with us today, and we've done the lead survey of, which is an estimate of, some right here, good. And we'd be happy to pass these out to the council here. There's I'll just take yours. What you did here? Okay, just have any question? This is a summary and the detailed analysis of each of the elements of the summary behind it, and shows how we've arrived at, in this case, points of 53. 50 are necessary for LEED Silver. As you can see, it spreads across the full spectrum of things involved in energy in the building.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Parker.
All right, if there's no questions, I do have one public. Is there anyone else on your team that wants to make a presentation? Or
no, thank you.
That's it. Okay,
Appreciate
thank you,
it.
Mr. Parker. If we have any more questions, we'll call you back up. I do have one speaker, Mike Mohill.
Thank you, Mayor Quintero, council people. Mike Mohill, resident of Glendale, long time. I'm excited about this project, but I'm also met reservations. We have big problems in Glendale right now. As you know, Marshall's shoe store just went out of business on Brand Boulevard. Crown Books is now going in across the street. We got a lot of competition also. In the Daily News, there's an article about NoHo. They're revising their entertainment area. We have competition with Pasadena. We must be different than all of them. And we are going to, based on what's happening right now, we will be different, absolutely, but in a negative way. Let me tell you why. Maryland is too narrow of a street. 5-story building will look like a Grand Canyon on Maryland. Street needs to be widened at least double. Setbacks double. Wide sidewalks. Room for the trolley. Room for at least one lane of traffic in both directions. We have to think bigger. We're competing with the other entertainment sections of the county. We need to have a card club. I'm saying it again. Upscale. It's going to bring crime to the city. We already have it. We got drugs in North Glendale. This will bring no additional crime to the city. It'll be different. Wow. Glendale not only does it have the Americana and the Galleria, it also has a card club and Lucky Strike lanes and Artco Theater. 3, as I mentioned to you last time I spoke before you, 3 anchors. Lucky Strike is great. Artco Theater, upscale, and the card club. Everything else will be fill-in. But we must widen Maryland Avenue. You know, you look at, you go to the Grove and you go to the Americana. What do you like about the Americana? It's nice, wide, and open. People like to go for a stroll in the Americana. I went to the Grove one time and never again. When they played the music there, I had a headache. It was like a Grand Canyon. We have excitement. Let's not destroy it. Let's make Maryland wider before we put any other buildings. Because remember, this is competition. North Hollywood, Old Town Pasadena, LA Live. But Glendale is going to be different. We got the Americana. We got the Galleria. We got trolleys. We got a card club. It's exciting. Glendale's going to be the destination place, Mr. Quintero. Mr. Draymond was right with Lucky Strike. I just don't know if Lucky Strike is the right location. That's my concern.
Thank you, Mr. Mulhill.
Okay. I'm going to leave this with you, this article about the drug problems in Glendale, and also the article about what's happening in North Hollywood, our competition.
Okay,
thank you again.
Very much. All right, are there any comments or questions from the staff or Mr. Weaver?
Let me start that I met with Mr. Parker last week. I wanted to say something on the very small world theory. Mr. Parker went to USC as I did, but he got his degree in architecture there, although he's a civil engineer like I am. His father was in the Seabees like I was, and his father worked for the Corps of Engineers like I did. And I was in the Seabees during the Vietnam era, like Mr. Parker was. And I was stationed in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, in Makalapa Crater, inside a 2-story building on the 2nd floor. So was Mr. Parker. The only thing that separated us, I was there in 64, 65, and he was there 2 or 3 years later on the same floor where I worked for 2 years. So it is indeed a small world that so many similarities on that. As the project, we met and I looked at the drawings and stuff, and I told him it looked nice, concept, so on. But you know, me as an engineer, I got to dig deeper. And looking at the staff report and looking at the drawings when I had more time, I have some concerns. I mean, I like the project, but I have concerns I need to get addressed in my own mind. One is the height. As far as I can tell, I've seen here different reports of 80 to 85 to 90 feet tall. I think that would be higher than any building east of Brand, and would certainly be taller than the building now being built east of this site. Do we want to have a building that's getting taller as you go east on Brand, or the same height or lower? That's a question. As you know, when Circuit City was built there some years ago, I voted against the project. I think I lost 4-1. And one of the main reasons is Circuit City was not putting any doorways or openings at the corner of Brand and Maryland. You had to walk down the block to go in. In essence, to me, it was a dead corner. the way it is today and looking at it, I think that the bowling alley ought to be moved over towards the south and a bigger restaurant put on the corner with doors open to draw people in, invigorate that corner. Since the Maryland Garage is going to house the commercial area, if you're using the bowling alley, whatever, you'll be closer to Lucky Strike if you're coming in where the proposal is now for the entrance to the apartments. I just think it's wrong to put the bowling alley up close front where you're trying to get people in. The seating along Broadway, one row of seats, I've talked to people that have eaten in other areas on Broadway there, saying it's horrendous with all the traffic, it's not quiet. It would seem to have more area inside in a bigger restaurant format would do better. I also noticed that there are no balconies. Some of the drawings we saw of other projects, there were balconies, and I guess the trade-off is the roof. And I commented to Mr. Parker that if it's 100 degrees or 110 degrees during the summer in the city, nobody's going to go up on that roof the way it's designed right now. There's no swimming pools, a couple of little water features, no shade. It's going to have brilliant sun to 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. Tenants living there are not going to go up and have the same kind of a nightlife that they do over in Hollywood in the new nightclub era of doing it on roofs. I think you have to put a lot more shading in there, and maybe the combination of shading with solar panels on the roof would work good. But you want to make it a place when the singles or the young marrieds come home at night, they will want to go up to that roof deck, maybe to eat and to socialize. But I don't think it serves that purpose right now. Another thing, I saw off first-rate appliances, all that's great, but I'm a big fan of home and garden TV. And there's two things that when they're trying to sell houses and the prospective buyers go in and look at them, there's two things that they don't like or they do like. They ask, where's the closet space? They want continued more closet space. And like in the loft area, I suggest underneath the stairs going up that they put closet space in there, or shelves. That's number one thing every single person going into a house that I watch on that show wants. Where are the closets? Oh, that's not big enough. I need more closet space. I guess we're more pack rats, or we buy more. The other thing they don't like when they see it is a clothes washer dryer next to the kitchen. But it's inevitable in this case. There's no way you can separate the two. The big thing that I'm concerned about is, and I received, thank you, Mr. Parker, for a second letter that I received yesterday, saying we will not be able to move forward on this project if we don't have 248 units. That means while all our conditions say 173, if we say 172, he can't build. I mean, if we say 246 rather than 248, he can't do it. And I don't see where we're in a situation at this point in time to determine exactly how many units are going to be in there because of the impacts of AB 1818. I think that's something that staff has to work out and resolve with Mr. Parker on, can he really do the 248? Or are we going to require other conditions on there that'll drive down the number of units? I've read the stuff on 1818, and I pulled it off the internet and read more, and I'm as confused as I can be trying to understand it in the applications in the downtown specific area with AB 1818 on top of it. How does that impact how many units will actually eventually go in there? So in a way, I think it's premature for us to be looking at it until that one issue is straightened out. There's a number of conditions that have been put on it, and I support those conditions. But one of them, identify the downtown specific plan incentive in exchange for the height density bonus necessary to increase the height from the DSP 4 stories, 2.5, to 6 stories, 3.0. And one of the things that's needed, affordable housing plan, which includes the density bonus, concessions, and waivers. I think that should have been decided before it got here for stage 1. Because if it's a lower number, either they're not going to be able to do it and they'll leave Glendale, or they will find a way to come down, but it could totally change the architectural rendering that we're seeing. So I don't know where it's going to go. Leaving it all to stage 2 doesn't seem to be, in my mind, the way to go. This is totally new. We have nothing like this in Glendale. And one of the most important things for me, this is setting a precedent. There's going to be other developers in town. They're going to take the same statistics, come rushing in, and try to build the same kind of a structure. Now, we talked about when we developed the downtown specific plan to try to concentrate future housing and stuff downtown so we would invigorate downtown. But we don't want to overdo it. I think we're going to have to develop a new overlay zone that indicates where this type of building can be built. And I don't know what that is yet. But it is setting a precedent. And there are other developers that are watching this, or will watch this, or will talk about it. I wouldn't be surprised to see more showing up at the door. We just can't afford to go too far one way without doing homework and understanding where we're going. I'm not against this, but I have these concerns. I would like to see some more of them resolved, especially the density bonus package. And we don't have that at this time. So I don't know what's going to happen to the architectural style or the other things. If it comes back the exact same way, I don't know if I can vote for it with all the different things I've mentioned. So that's why I'm at this time. I appreciate the time of Mr. Parker and going over it. And I think planning staff and community planning and redevelopment have some more work to do to get to the point where I'm satisfied and staff can come to me any time and tell me how you're going to work it out. At least answer my questions. Again, I appreciate the effort, and I'd like to see where it goes from here.
Ms. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm generally supportive of this project. I understand the vision and the rationale behind it. I've lived in urban areas in very small loft apartments or studio apartments, so I understand the idea of trading off that personal space for gaining the public space and the proximity to the public space when you're in an urban core. And I support that because as we grow as a city, the place that makes the most sense to grow is in the downtown. And for that reason, I don't have a problem with the density. I don't have a problem with the parking. I don't have a problem with the height. There's certainly a lot bigger buildings on Brand, and we will see larger buildings, hopefully, spreading in that area in the future. That's the trade-off for keeping our single-family neighborhoods more or less intact. As we grow, we can grow in the downtown area. I also believe that this will help to revitalize and invigorate the downtown and bring people who are going to be very likely to use the restaurants and go to the Americana and the Galleria and all of that. So I think that that's all very positive. I feel a little more comfortable in their ability to rent all of this at the rents if they were a little larger, 100 square feet, let's say, for the non-loft units, or if they were all lofts, which is why I asked the question. I'm not sure if it would pencil out for you to put another story or two on the building to make them all lofts. I don't know if that works. If it did, I would certainly be supportive of it. Because I don't think you're going to have any problem with the loft units. I think they're beautiful and they will rent at that price. I'm a little concerned about the non-loft units, whether they really will be able to command that rent. But this is in some ways an experiment, and it's your investment and your risk. So I don't have a problem voting for that, especially since you've made the kind of plan B of being able to combine units if you do have that kind of a problem in the future. Let's see. I would prefer if the Lucky Strikes had a presence on Broadway, because I think that as people go up and down Broadway, they'll see that, and it'll be an attraction for them, and it'll be an attraction for people that will bring them all the way down Maryland. So I think that your major tenant needs to have a presence there, whether it's an entrance or, you shift them there and move your cafe. I know that that would be some reconfiguring, but I think that it's important to have, if you do attract a major tenant like a Lucky Strikes, that you can see them all the way from Brand. I think that's what's going to get people into that business. I agree with the urban planner's recommendations, and I would hope that if we do move this forward, that becomes part of that motion. The one that I'm not so sure about was the recommendation about the roof garden and making different gardens with different themes. I think that really should be more up to the designers. However, I agree with Mr. Weaver that there needs to be some real thought given to shade structures to make it usable and ways of cooling it, and to consider putting in one of those sort of small current lap pools, that it's a 1 or 2 person pool or something like that, might also be a recommendation for you to think about. I do hope that you are as diligent as you can about capping the number of renters, because I think that what you don't want is for it to turn into kind of a dorm room building with lots and lots of people living in these small units. So I don't know how easy it'll be to do that, but I hope that you can find a way. But I do hope it gets built. I think that it's a nice-looking building, and I think it'll do a lot for that area. So I'm glad to see it here and looking forward to seeing it in the next phase. Thank you.
Well, I'll go next. Thank you. First of all, it was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Parker, because, well, Mr. Weaver talked about your father. I'll talk about your grandfather.
Oh, we're really going back.
And no, I didn't serve in the military with him. But you can't be interested in photographic history of the area without knowing Mr. Parker's relations. As a matter of fact, our special collections at the Central Library is filled with his copies of his photographs of the Pasadena area, the Arroyo, and some of the foothill communities. So it was interesting to meet you and learn a little more detail about the flight of the American, famous balloon that took off at Tournament Park in Pasadena and came down somewhere over Strawberry Peak, and the occupants of the balloon, including your grandfather, I guess, climbed out of that balloon gondola and hiked down through a meadow to a farm, and of course there were no phones or cell phones, so they were considered lost. It was big LA news in its time, front page stories. Anyway, so a pioneering project of a different sort for Glendale. Let me start, Mr. Mayor, by saying I support this project. I support this project for a variety of reasons that are reasoned or philosophical. I know today's agenda deals more with scale and mass and site plan, but I want to talk about those other issues as well before I get to that. We've been talking for some time about building a new downtown and reinvigorating our downtown. In the time I've served on this council, which is coming up almost on 3 years now, I haven't seen a project that has come before either redevelopment or the council that has been as well researched as this project has been, in terms of researching the demographic that is necessary for this project to succeed, and specifically researching the demographic in our city and in our immediate region that will make this project succeed. Because I believe for this to succeed, this project has to become, and I think will become, the home base for the revitalization of our downtown. My colleagues and I have undertaken a very big step, I think, in working on the rezoning of Maryland through the exchange, as Mr. Lanzafame mentioned earlier, from basically Harvard at the library all the way up to Wilson. So not just the exchange, but that whole strip, which is envisioned now as our arts and entertainment district. And we have a demographic in mind. It is the demographic that is not only the one that Mr. Parker and his associates are talking about, but the demographic that every retailer in this city is screaming for, whether it's Mr. Caruso, or the people at General Growth or the mom and pops on Mid-Brand. They're looking for the young urban professional that is living more or less around us. And those folks are part of our population in this city, 9 to 5, large, vast majority of them. And I'd like to see them part of our population 24/7, so that those disposable dollars that they have, that disposable income, is spent in our city rather than in our neighboring cities and neighboring towns. That's one of the reasons I think this project is not just important but essential for the development of this amended zoning that we have envisioned and created. Precedents, you're right, Mr. Weaver, it will, and we have to be very careful. But here are the precedents that I think are very important, aside from those that you mentioned. It is also setting a precedent for a forward-looking vision that meets modern standards for housing, that will, through its well-researched nature, provide the foot traffic for our retail, entertainment, and restaurant venues in the downtown. And I think it'll set a precedent in that it is housing that is designed for a specific demographic that is desirable. And as I said before, I think it will become, at least until there are others like it in our city, the home base for the revitalization of our downtown core. Having said that, I do like the design aside from those elements. I'm glad that the well-thought-out research with regard to the demographic you envision is carried out through the commercial space on the ground floor as well. And I think that is essential. And whether it's Lucky Strike Lanes at this location or further up the block, where we've also been talking to them about further up the street, in any case, whether it is Lucky Strike or a venue or an entity like that, that's the way to go. So I'm glad to see that is carrying through on the commercial aspect of it as well. I won't repeat what I've heard from my colleagues that I think is important. The comments from both Mr. Weaver and Ms. Friedman related to the use of the rooftop space. If we're going that direction, it has to be usable space. And I agree with Mr. Weaver that it will not be usable space except in a technical sense unless people can actually use it during the time when, that's the reason people come to Southern California. It's the warm weather. And it's not just the height of the summer. It'll be warmer up there even when it isn't 110 degrees down on the street. So we do need shade structures there. We need it to be an inviting space that isn't just technically usable space, but actually will be usable space. I'm very happy with the sort of Plan B idea that we've been sort of discussing and staff has been discussing with you, that you've addressed today, Mr. Parker, dealing with the ability to be able to expand these units if that need should arise. On the other hand, I look at the fact that this is not a partnership project. You're bringing the money to the table. This is your project. You're basing it on your research and your know-how. You don't look to me, and you don't sound to me, nor any of your associates, like kamikazes in this process. So it's not my assumption that you're planning to build something that's going to be a failure. That is just not what I pick up from you. So I think it's a good, sound project. If we're sincere about building this arts and entertainment district, if we're sincere about bringing this demographic to the city, then we can no longer sit on the edge and dunk our toe in the water and say we're thinking about it. We actually have to go forward and say, okay, we're going to take this step and become a leader in advancing this project. So that's what I plan to do today. I plan to cast my vote to support this project. This is just the first go at it, so I know that we will get the rest of the design elements worked out. But overall, I'm very pleased with the design, and also I'm very pleased with your look at the lead silver component. And thank you for providing this document. It's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Najarian.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to meet with Mr. Parker and his staff about a month ago. I have some mixed feelings about the project. I think it's important that we have a mixed-use project at that location, incorporating a significant number of residential units. But the size of the units really are troubling to me. At 375 square feet, they're very small. They're very tiny. And I'm not sure the examples of other successful projects translate well into what the demographics are in Glendale. There was a Westwood building, and I think at Westwood you're close to a very large university, Santa Monica, and San Francisco. The research that you provided us talked about national trends and a national survey. I'm not sure that translates into what we have here in Glendale and even some of our surrounding communities. So that's a concern of mine. I would be much, much happier if these units were 600-700 square foot minimum. And the project is asking for a lot of relief, parking, density, height, the list goes on. With those, Ms. Friedman said, well, it's reminded her of a dorm in some way. And that's what struck me first. This is more of a dorm in terms of the size. But then I said, well, throw in a bar at the downstairs. You don't have a dorm, you have a frat house. And I've been in frat houses, and we were young and we were urban, and many of us were fortunate enough to have disposable income from our parents. And I think that's what's going to be attracted to those units. I'd like to see a better mix of units. Not saying that studios should be completely eliminated, but the vast majority at the 300 square foot, and even the largest is just under 500 square feet, I think. Those are tiny, tiny units. I'd like to see some work done on the mix. I think that's critical. We're bringing a lot of people in, and different mix of the units, I think, will give us a little better blend when we're talking demographics. Maybe we'll have more couples in here. But at a 375 square foot unit, you're really just talking about one person living comfortably. So if it was up to me, my consideration at this point, if I had to give direction, would be to increase the blend of units, get some of the units a little bit larger. You talked about Plan B. Plan B sounds a lot better to me than Plan A, keeping those 248 single units. Those are my thoughts on the subject.
Okay. Well, let me start by one of the exhibits. Exhibit A are the recent and pipeline projects. The Redevelopment Agency made a sort of a catalog and a map. The problem is that the pipeline projects, and those are projects basically that have been entitled under the specific plan, they're not getting built. Verdugo Gardens up on Central is out. Orange and Milford is out. The city center at Brand is out. Hopefully there'll be something coming online there soon. It's a empty lot. Louise Gardens, et cetera, et cetera. So with the downturn in the economy, basically our downtown, in terms of our strategic plan and goals to bring urban professionals to the downtown to live. And when I say urban professionals, they can be married couples or at any age, those who have decided to live within a downtown context, as they're doing in Los Angeles and all over Southern California. We are dead in the water. So I'm very happy that we have a development team with a track record. This is nothing new for them, that's chosen to come to our downtown area, and specifically that corner, which is completely and utterly dead and has been for a number of years. I mean, Circuit City, even at its height, had literally no traffic. I just never did understand why they continued to keep the doors open, but as we know, eventually that type of thinking led to their bankruptcy. So I think this is the right project in the right corner, but obviously it has to be done skillfully so that it will bring in the tenants, number one, and just as important to me is that that commercial corner really pop and really signify, an entrance sort of to Maryland, to the marketplace, and in the other direction to the exchange. So it's a very important corner, and whatever you do architecturally, and we will be refining the approach as the months go on. Whatever you do architecturally on that corner, it has to stand out. Lucky Strike included. I mean, there has to be I think there should be some visibility from Brand and Broadway, and not kind of be nestled on the side streets. We've seen, it's been our experience on Maryland, we've seen some very successful businesses that have worked in different locations, including a restaurant that to this day, it's in the Promenade in Santa Monica. It's still packed every time I go. They tried it on Maryland, and it failed. So just, take it from the experienced Maryland shoppers. You've got to make sure you've got some signage from Brand and Broadway, et cetera. But at any rate, I like the approach to the building. I like the way it's set up. The units are small, but I think some people are fine with those square footages. But I'm comforted by the fact that if the trend goes in another direction, you can actually go into one-bedroom or two-bedroom units. So all in all, I'm very pleased to have you here, and you have my support. We have a long way to go with all of the different with the SB 18 and the DSP and everything else that we have to work through. But I think we're moving in the right direction, and I hope this is the first of many other developments that come online in the downtown. I've talked about it a few months ago. We sort of discovered it, but in fact, AT&T had moved to a downtown Brand building, occupied a number of floors, and it was basically AT&T's division. I have to get the right name, but it's the AT&T division that deals with internet and so forth. Everyone that is working for that company, first of all, there wasn't a coat and tie in all the floors. Absolutely everyone was in shirts and jeans. Very young people, some of whom had come from Yahoo and other internet companies. So I can't help but think that would be the type of person that would be attracted here. Hollywood Production Center, which is across the street on Broadway, and there's another Hollywood Production Center fully leased on Brand. Same way, you have people working in those two buildings that could be potential clients. So I think you're going to do fine, and I think as a result, all of the little restaurants surrounding and shops surrounding this building will increase their business. So, okay, do we need Ms. Friedman?
Just one other thing is I would like to strongly recommend that as you move forward, you hire a landscape architect to work on that roof. I think it needs a lot of fleshing out. It's a big element of this building. And I think that someone who's, experienced with doing that kind of landscape, it seems very sparse right now, what it needs to be. And
that goes for the streetscape along Broadway and Maryland. I'd like to really see that somewhat softened with some landscaping and just make it attractive so people can feel comfortable walking in and out. Did Mr. Lansing?
No, I have a concern. I had referred Mr. Parker down to the Americana, the second floor of the apartment building. Other cabanas, barbecue, swimming pool, all amenities. It'd be lovely to live there with everything they have on that elevated platform there. And that last thing I would hope, since this is unique, that when it comes back to us, that the preparation be done by Alan Loomis and Annette. We're talking big-time things with what we're doing with the density bonus and whatever. You can't separate the two, so I don't think planning with our principal urban planner should be in a review mode, but actually in the preparation mode. I just sense that that isn't happening right now. I know it's down, I know it's in the redevelopment zone, but community planning ought to be involved just as much. It doesn't show it here.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Raver, you do raise a very good point. In fact, we have Milka Toledo is the planner working on the project, as well as we have two lawyers on it, Mr. Garcia and Ms. Van Meiden, working to put this into place. When this comes back to you, if you should vote to approve Stage 1, when this comes back to you, as Mr. Garcia had outlined, we will need to make some approvals for additional density. You will want to be looking at its context within, for instance, the entertainment district, and it may be appropriate there, or it may not be appropriate in other locations throughout the city. That would be, I imagine, part of your consideration. Also, I want to just point out on the last page of your staff report, there's some 11 other approvals that will be needed to be made. Some of them are familiar to you, others are not, because this is a unique project. We will be working on those between Stage 1, again, if you approve it, and Stage 2 when it comes back to you. Of particular note is the parking agreement. One thing we noted in the staff report we did not hear in your presentation. There is 17 years left on the agreement to use that parking. The developer has asked to increase that to 50 years. So we'll be talking about terms of that, and what makes sense going that far out, and that will be an additional approval for your consideration.
Thank you. All right, so...
Mr. Mayor, I'm assuming that there's going to be a motion at 1A, but included in that motion are the comments and recommendations of the city's principal urban designer. Mm-hmm. And I'd like him to just come forward and highlight what his concerns are, whether he sees working with the applicant to address some of our concerns, whether you share some of the concerns you heard, or...
Yes, Mr. Najarian, I'm Alan Loomis, principal urban designer who wrote those conditions. I think, in fact, a number of the comments that you and fellow agency and council members have made echoed the same concerns I had. Concerns about the landscape design for the roof deck, the visibility and prominence of the corner of Broadway and Maryland, whether that be Lucky Strike or some of the other entertainment and retail venues. So those are some of the concerns that I principally raised. There was a concern Mr. Quintero raised about the landscape design at the streetscape. I raised that concern as well. So I think most of the concerns I had, you've echoed already. So I think.
How about some of my concerns? Am I off the page on these, or that's what I'd like, some sort of, some verification, or
colleague is looking for some bolstering
in
some corner of the city.
Validation is the word you're looking for.
I think you had asked for a mix of unit sizes, was something that would be useful. I didn't specifically address the issue of mix of unit size, but as it relates to the facade design, which is right now a kind of very rigid grid of windows, I had suggested some variety across the window design would actually help the design, and whether that's accomplished architecturally through a mix of unit sizes, I think would be very helpful as well.
I won't belabor the subject, but we just went through the whole downtown strategic plan, and we came up upon your recommendations largely, and our trust in you that the minimum square footage of a lot, of a unit should be 600 square feet. So now we've got someone with a 375 square foot for many of the units, not all of them. I need to somehow rationalize that now it's okay. Should we go back and change the DSP, or this is okay because?
I think a way to approach this particular project would be that, given the direction you've given us regarding the entertainment district on Maryland, that would be the parameters that we would say in this particular location we could consider smaller unit sizes and maybe not reconsider the entire downtown specific plan or zoning standards throughout the city. And in fact, legal staff and planning staff have discussed that actually this afternoon.
I have a hard time making the connection between sizes of residential units and the development encouraging entertainment uses to come in, but that's just me. I'm not the professional.
Mr. Draymond.
I want to try to help my colleague, Mr. Najarian, with this a bit. And part of it, I think, has to do with the demographic that's been identified. The demographic has been identified with a bottom age number, a lower age number, and an upper age number. That doesn't mean that the residents of this site or this project would necessarily be 18 to 21-year-olds. In fact, that was one of the first questions that I was asking, because I know your concerns are absolutely heartfelt, and I share some of those, and that's why I asked those exact same questions. And they're looking at young urban professionals. Those are not high school kids or freshmen in college. They were talking about the research showing a particular demographic. That doesn't mean that the entire spectrum of that demographic is what they're anticipating living in this project. In fact, I know this demographic, and this demographic is these are the folks that are currently living in the Silver Lake area, Los Feliz Hills, Los Feliz, Atwater, North Hollywood, and so on. They're the group that is the engine for most of the restaurant and entertainment and more, shall we say, youth-oriented retail, whether it's apparel or whatever, in those areas. And many of those folks are working in our city right now. They're here. They are right here in our city, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and then they clog up our freeway, our streets and our freeway on-ramps to go home and leave the city. And when you talk to a lot of them and say, why aren't you living in the city where you work, the answer is, you don't have the housing inventory that is of interest to us. And so they're leaving our city, and they're going back to Silver Lake and Atwater, North Hollywood, and Los Feliz, and areas like that, a little further away, a little further east, and a little further west, and in downtown, and so on. So, meaning downtown Los Angeles. So, although I was initially concerned about some of the allusions to frat house and dorm issues, I don't have those concerns any longer, because it's not that demographic. It is not that age demographic, and it is not that income demographic. This is a demographic that uses the city to do its entertaining. They don't do their entertaining in their apartment. The apartment is the place to live. The entertaining is done using the facilities of the city itself. If you will, it's almost the same reasoning that this agency considered as sort of a hotel concept that was not a full-service hotel, because we were saying this demographic is going to come and take hotel rooms and then go out into the city and use our restaurants and our entertainment venues. It's the same kind of concept. And that's one of the reasons that I'm supporting this. But I agree with you and some of the things Mr. Weaver said as well, and the advice of our senior urban planner, which is maybe this should be something that we look at because of its adjacency to this entertainment district, and consider it something special for that, so that we don't end up with a developer or development project after development project coming back and saying, hey, I can name that demographic on 200 square feet. So,
Mr. Weaver.
I think I said it already, but I think I'll say it again. I worked 10 years to push through a DSP plan that included heights and densities amongst other factors. Now, if we're going to change and go higher and more dense, we better get that downtown specific plan back here and let this council modify again the densities and the heights and what zones we want them in. It took 10 years to get what we already had on the books, and now we're going away from it within a year or two. That's one thing. And as far as doing demographic studies, going well. Judging by the Americana, who also did a huge amount of demographics, it has not materialized in the Americana yet. They're not coming, they're not spending, and high end, some of them are going out of the Americana. And people saying, I just can't afford to buy here. The demographics that was done on the Americana said they would come. Oh, maybe it's the recession, why they haven't come. But total stock in demographics, Glendale is different than Westwood or a lot of other areas where you want to compare it to. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they come.
Ms. Friedman.
I think that what makes this project a little different isn't so much that it's in the entertainment district. I'm going to disagree with my colleagues. I do think that being downtown makes it a little bit different, but what really will make this succeed or not succeed is the quality of the project. I mean, people will make that trade-off, I think, for the smaller units if they're getting in return a really classy environment, a really high-tech kitchen, just a different kind of living experience than maybe they would get for the same money in a bigger unit. I think that's really the bottom line here. You know, $1,400 will get you a one-bedroom apartment in Glendale. I just went through looking for apartments with a friend of mine. It doesn't really get you a great one-bedroom apartment. You know, it gets you kind of an older one-bedroom apartment, or maybe not in the greatest location. This is, you're paying for the location, and you're paying for the hardwood floors and the granite countertops and the washer dryer in the kitchen and all of those things that they're providing. That's where I can make that justification, and I think that that's why we don't want to make this a blanket thing where we're okay with that size wherever and however. The idea is that we leave kind of the downtown plan the way it is, but when someone comes in and says to us, look, I know we're below what your plan is asking for, but look what we're giving in exchange, then we have the leeway of saying yes or no. And I think that's what we're really being asked here, and that's the leap of faith that we're taking, that you will attract the demographic that we wanted and that it will succeed with the people that we want, and it will be a filled building because we're trusting the builders to do such a good job with all of those details that you'll get those people. You'll get the people working at Disney. You'll get the people working at Hollywood Production Center. You'll get those people who are now working in our city but living elsewhere. That's, I think, the end goal, and that's the idea here, and that's what they're proposing. That's the essence of it. I did want to call the planning director up. He seemed like he moved from the back of the room to the front of the room, so I had this premonition, that he might have something to add. So, Mr. Hagani.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hassan Hagani, Director of Community Planning. I wanted to address the unit size that Mr. Najarian raised, and that was, I think it's worth going through that discussion. At the time that we were conceptualizing the downtown specific plan, we had a number of discussions with advisory group members, both in the zoning code advisory group members and the downtown specific plan advisory group. And the unit size that was proposed was a result of a lot of discussion. However, I have to say that at the time that we also discussed the downtown specific plan, you're going to have a presentation on the mobility study. We also discussed reducing parking standards, and that was not exactly received very well by a lot of people because people were a little bit nervous about stepping out of the norm that has been Glendale for a long time and embracing some of the new ideas. We, amongst staff, had very similar concerns. We have been discussing this project, and our concern wasn't necessarily that it would turn into an SRO, but that you would have a high-end, very nice project. What if the market wasn't there and the units stayed empty? I have to say that the Plan B, as it has been proposed, has addressed a lot of our concerns. We think it's an experiment that's worth doing with that Plan B in mind, because I know buildings like that in Copenhagen. My sister happens to live there. My sister happens to live in a unit size like this, and she's not a fraternity age person. She's a little bit older than me. And I know in their building they're actually doing what was proposed as Plan B, that you see young people, or sometimes not so young people, wanting to get married, and then they don't want to leave that area because it's such a desirable place to be, and they do exactly that. They drop walls and they turn the units into larger units. As long as we have no regulation to prevent that from happening, I think that's something we could try with and test with.
Okay, well, I think the attraction will be the location, number one, and then the quality of the tenants and how long they stay will depend on the kitchen, as Ms. Friedman says, what kind of quality goes into that, and the public spaces. I mean, people that live in apartment buildings, especially this one, are going to be very interested in using that rooftop to socialize, to do whatever they want to do, and the public spaces down in the, obviously that cafe, there'll be numerous tenants that are going to consider that as sort of part of their living room, part of their kitchen. And so anyway, I think it's going to be a successful project. Mr. Raymond.
Well, I couldn't agree with the last comment more. That is exactly what I think. I think that that clearly the reason the development group has chosen this site is its proximity to the entertainment district that's being planned. That was the whole sum and substance of their presentation. So I don't think there's any question that that's the reason. And I don't. You know, the people who are going to come to live here, they're not coming to live here for the value. The rental will come to play at some point, but that's not going to be the key factor. Yeah, can you find a one-bedroom in Glendale for that price or less, or even a two-bedroom in certain circumstances? Absolutely. But the people that are going to come here aren't doing. They're not the value shoppers. They're coming here specifically for a lifestyle choice. That's the point. This is for a lifestyle choice, and the lifestyle choice is A, to live near and around other people of a similar demographic, interest level, similar level of disposable income, entertainment interests, purchasing interests, etc. Secondarily will be the value of the rental. That doesn't mean it's not important, though, and that's why, although I may disagree with my colleague on the priority of those two, certainly she's absolutely correct. If these units are not appointed properly, if they're not designed in a way that makes them unique, then you don't have the lifestyle element that I'm speaking about. So I'm going to be very interested as we go forward in seeing more detail about that and making sure that those elements are secured for this project. Oh, and one last thing, Mr. Mayor, with regard to the look at demographics as it relates to the Americana, you bet it's the economy. Trust me, Caruso Affiliated didn't just take a pig in a poke. What injured the move-in in terms of the condos and the apartments there, to the extent it has been injured, is that project opened just as the bottom fell out of the housing market, and really nothing more. And as those units fill up, you will see the residents there doing exactly what the design and intention was. They will be hopefully shopping in those stores and dining in those restaurants and making use of our city in and around the Americana.
Okay, do I have a motion at 1A?
I'll move 1A.
And a second?
Okay, just as a question, Mr. Mayor, is this an agency motion or is this an agency?
Oh, it is.
Okay.
Well, then.
So we have a motion, but do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second at 1A. If there's no further discussion, Mr. Kasakian, let's call the roll.
Agency members: Friedman.
Yes.
Najarian.
No.
Quintero.
Yes.
Weaver.
With concerns, yes.
Chairman Draymond.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries. Who knows, Mr. Weaver and I might be doing adjoining studios someday here at Broadway.
I'm going to look for.
Who knows?
I'm going to look for a tenant that can get me up to the roof garden.
Okay, next, please.
Item 2 on this agenda is Directors of Community Planning, Public Works, and Community Redevelopment and Housing regarding Downtown Specific Plan and Mobility Study Implementation Update and a request for additional funding for professional services. At 2A is a council resolution appropriating $60,000 of parking fund net assets to provide funding for the professional services agreement with Nelson Nygaard to fund studies, research, and implementation of the in lieu fee Downtown Mobility Fund district-based preferential parking and downtown parking standards. At B is resolution appropriating $60,000. Is the agency resolution appropriating $60,000 CRH Central Project Area undesignated funds to provide funding for the professional services agreement with Nelson Nygaard to fund studies, research, and implementation of the in lieu fee Downtown Mobility Fund district-based preferential parking and downtown parking standards. And at C is a council motion approving the change order for Nelson Nygaard Consultant Associates in the amount of $120,000, contract total including the change order not to exceed $240,000.
All right, Mr. Starbird.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'll turn to Alan Loomis in just a second, but thought I'd make a couple of supplemental comments as we get into this next item. A lot of discussion during your last item about the Downtown Specific Plan. You recall the Downtown Specific Plan had as one of its key elements the development of the mobility strategy for the downtown area, with the goal of looking at ways for increasing density in the downtown, yet at the same time improving the quality of life, making it more pedestrian friendly. And the project that you just considered is certainly an indication that there is a market and a desire for the kind of urban setting that I think was envisioned as we began the Downtown Strategic Plan and attached to that the mobility study. Now that we're in, I'll call this a bit of a downtime in the economy, we're not seeing the kind of development we did. Now is the time to make sure that we're putting the right building blocks and strategies in place. And that means implementing the strategies in the Downtown Specific Plan at a time that when development does come back, we'll have those various tools in place. And that's our purpose here today, is to bring you a status report on the mobility plan and also begin to talk about those elements that we feel we need to proceed with to implement the various tools. With that, Mr. Loomis.
Thank you, Mr. Starbird, and Mr. Mayor and council members, agency chair, and agency members. With your indulgence, we have a few slides that are more to help the TV audience at home sort of follow along than necessarily to illustrate the talk. As Mr. Starbird said, this report is regarding the Downtown Specific Plan, which was adopted in end of 2006, and the mobility study, which complements the DSP adopted in March 2007. This report is a status on where we stand in implementing some of the programs called for in both documents. So I'm going to lead the presentation, but want to acknowledge that this was put together in conjunction with John Bogdanian, who heads our Traffic and Transportation Division, and Bonnie Nelson, who is the consultant that wrote the mobility study. So I'll do a little brief introduction and then actually ask Mike Nielsen, who's the mobility planner in the planning department, to talk about where we're at with the mobility study and conclude. As was mentioned in the council or in clerk's reading of the agenda item, one of the items we'll be asking for at the end of the presentation is some direction on where your priorities are relative to what we should do next in implementing the mobility study, and in particular a request that came through the Traffic and Parking Commission to engage Nelson Nygaard to further work on some of the mobility study elements, and in particular study the preferential parking policy, district policies that we have set up in the downtown, or throughout the city, in fact. So with that, the Downtown Specific Plan, as mentioned, is largely a sort of set of standards and guidelines for reviewing development projects. So maybe the most obvious measure of how it succeeds is the number of projects that have been entitled or built under the plan. Mayor Quintero had mentioned Exhibit A in the previous discussion, which is a map of development projects. As of 5 minutes ago now, there is 11 projects, ground-up projects, that have been entitled in one form or another by the agency or council in the downtown area. Some of them are illustrated here. As was previously mentioned, a number of these are high-rise projects that at this point are not moving forward, and we don't know the status of those projects at the moment. There's still development interest, as we saw just recently, and continue to see for smaller-scale projects. There are 2 projects that were entitled under the Downtown Specific Plan that have gone under construction or been completed. One is the adaptive reuse of the old DPSS building for the Hollywood Production Center, and the ASLA facility, which you also had earlier today, is also entitled under the Downtown Specific Plan. And that's the image on the right that's under construction on Louise. This does not include, in this list of potential projects that have been under the Downtown Specific Plan, a variety of smaller scale, what you might call tenant improvement or facade improvement projects, such as BJ's Restaurant and Panera Bread. Facade improvements of both, which were guided by the guidelines and principles of the Downtown Specific Plan. The Downtown Specific Plan also called for a number of policies and programs that should be followed up as part of that, and many of those have been implemented. They include adopting some form of impact fee or to fund new parks. That's been done by the council, adopting a parks impact fee. There's an interest in an arts district, which you've initiated and we had a lot of discussion about just now. There's also been one of the programs that was called for was to streamline development review, which is one of the reasons the council sees all aspects of a project in one holistic review when they're finally entitled. And then finally, probably most importantly, was to adopt a comprehensive mobility plan, which, as I said, was done in March 2007. So to run, kind of give an overview of where we stand in implementing the recommendations of the mobility plan, I'm going to ask Mike Nielsen to finish off the presentation. Mike?
Good afternoon, members of the council and members of the agency. I'd like to start on mentioning where we're at with parking management. Most of the short-term and immediate-term items have been implemented, including the installation of pay-by-space meters along Brand Boulevard, as well as the adjustment of parking rates and hours in downtown. The next phase of parking management would involve a proposal to revise parking standards, as well as an option of paying a fee in lieu of providing code-required parking. In regards to transit service, in 2008, we have installed high-amenity bus shelters along Brand Boulevard. These shelters include real-time bus arrival information for the Glendale B line. From there, we have also prepared a line-by-line analysis, and that has been prepared and reviewed by the Traffic and Transportation and Parking Commission. We anticipate that this line-by-line analysis will be submitted to council in review for within the next few months. In regards to funding and financing, the mobility study supports us to generate locally generated financing mechanisms. One of those recommendations is the establishment of a downtown mobility fund to fund a variety of mobility improvements downtown, which could be anything from bicycle improvements to pedestrian and streetscape improvements, and if required, additional parking, as well as improvements in transit operations. From there, the mobility study did include street improvements to Central Avenue, Colorado Street, and Glendale Avenue. The Colorado Street improvements were implemented in 2009, which included upgraded pedestrian lighting, installation of street trees, improved sidewalks, improved crosswalks, and also roadway capacity improvements. Since then, we have started to work on the Central Avenue improvements, and we'll be submitting that sometime in the next year. From there, the mobility study dedicates a chapter to transportation demand management. Transportation demand management is a series of programs and financial incentives to promote alternative sources of transportation, which includes improved bicycle amenities, and includes van pools, car pools. It includes improved marketing sources for those promoting those alternative transportation measures. What we plan on doing is actually we would like to research those methods in further detail and send you more specific recommendations at a later date. In regards to bicycles, the mobility study references and supports implementation of the existing bicycle master plan. Since adoption of the mobility study, bicycle racks have been installed in Brand Boulevard starting in 2009. An additional 27 bike racks have been located throughout the downtown since January 2010 was the most recent installation. From there, the place grant was also awarded in 2008 to the City of Glendale. Since the grant has been adopted, we have been working and being coordinated with the Place Grant in ensuring that the upcoming Safe and Healthy Streets Plan, as well as any updates to the existing bicycle master plan, will be coordinated together to make sure that it fits within the mobility policy framework. Last but not least, preferential parking. This is one of the components of the mobility study that has not yet been implemented. Initial concerns regarding parking in multifamily zones were addressed by Council in January of last year. With that, there was a recommendation, and TPC, the Transportation Parking Commission, developed a multifamily parking subcommittee. Those recommendations were presented at the TPC hearing in December of 2009. At the last Transportation Parking Commission hearing in February 22nd, the TPC made a formal recommendation to study the preferential parking districts in the South Brand area. So, in conclusion, we are looking for direction from Council in regards to priority and implementation of tasks. We recommend Council to engage services with Nelson Nygaard to research, prepare studies, and potentially implement district-based preferential parking programs, as well as provide recommendations for transportation demand management, revised parking standards, and exploring alternative funding and financing mechanisms. I would like to also introduce John O'Bagdanian, Traffic Transportation Administrator, as well as Bonnie Nelson, who is the lead consultant and is the author of the Downtown Mobility Study. And John, Bonnie, and myself are available to answer any questions that you might have regarding the items presented in this presentation and the mobility study overall.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Friedman?
A question. I know that we had talked a little while ago about the wayfinding signs, and there was discussion about whether we should wait for our branding project to start initiating that signage. Is that, I was trying to remember and rack my brain where that long discussion ended up. So I guess that's my question is, are we moving forward with sort of our own random wayfinding signage now, or are we going to wait?
Agency member Friedman, members of the agency, your memory serves you right. We decided to move forward with a wayfinding sign program. We are actually anticipating to come back to you with a status report in towards the early to mid, I think it's April, right? April. The marketing effort has started recently, and they're coming to town next week for their first phase of the research and survey period, but the timing of the two will coincide at some point. One of the team members that they're outreaching is actually the city's wayfinding team to make sure that the two programs are moving together in sync, and there's coordination with the two efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The only question I have, I don't know whether you're ready for comments.
Okay, are there any comments or questions?
Okay. Mr. Najarian?
The mobility study is tied to our DSP and our thoughts for development and the density and all that. Do we need to revisit the mobility plan because we're developing this entertainment zone which changes densities and perhaps changes parking patterns, et cetera?
I think, in answer to that question, Mr. Najarian, I think we probably should be looking at the parking standards relative to the entertainment district and what kind of the sort of time frame in which those uses will be coming forward. For example, we've been talking about entertainment uses that are active in the evening as opposed to the daytime. That may have some impact on how we think about parking standards for entertainment type uses.
What are the borders of our entertainment district? I forget
it's not been precisely defined, but I think essentially we're talking about Maryland Avenue between the Central Library at Harvard up to Wilson and the Alex Theater. It's a two-block area that encompasses both the Exchange and Marketplace and their respective parking structures.
Okay.
If I may add, revisiting the parking standards for the entertainment district is absolutely consistent with the original policies of the downtown specific plan and the mobility study. It has always been a broad policy embedded in the downtown mobility study that we try to reduce parking demand, and one way to actually look at reducing parking demand is revisiting the parking standards and making sure that we're not over parking the downtown, and we're absolutely using every existing parking space to its optimal possible potential. And that would be one way to look at that.
So as an example, and not to get too far ahead, we just talked about a project, and there were some parking issues and variances and exceptions that they were potentially going to have to request for successful entitlement of their project. Is that something we should first deal with? What we're going to do with our entertainment zone, or work on it in terms of variances and exceptions as projects?
There are two different things, two different pools of tools that we're looking at. One is brand new projects that are coming in and they're asking for parking reductions. And one tool that we discussed at the time the downtown specific plan was adopted was to look at those and include in lieu fees and other ways of paying for the lost parking in a way that the city then can use that money through the fund to provide other amenities that will increase multimodal use of transportation in downtown rather than just single car driving to parking spaces. That's one piece. The other piece is the use of existing buildings so that we can recycle the existing stock in the downtown without having parking, for example, be an impediment for our economic development. And that's the second piece that we'll be focusing on in the entertainment district, that we're going to look at potential impediments that are in place because of the code and removing them, or finding ways that will be more easy for the council and agency to consider applications that will allow economic development.
Are we going to nail down this entertainment district issue at some point in the future?
Yes.
Is that coming before us?
Yes.
Because we're really throwing a lot of issues, and I think it's better if we clearly identify what it is, where it is, what concessions we'd like to make in terms of density, that's last item, but parking in this situation, and parking requirements, in lieu fees, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we will nail it down. But to begin with, let me say there is no mystery in it. To allow uses that need to come here, especially nighttime uses, we need to look and see what we can. The biggest obstacle is always parking, and there is we have never really looked at parking during different hours and see the existing parking spaces. How can we program them so that at hours, for example, that the daytime businesses are out, their parking that would be used during the day could be used for nighttime businesses. And to us, that's the biggest piece, and we're working out those details.
Mr. Starburn.
Mr. Mayor, just a supplemental comment. I think there's a number of reasons to come back and revisit the downtown specific plan. The biggest item being the change in the economy, and whether or not all those pretty tall projects that you saw in the previous slide are ever going to come back in their current form. I don't think, though, that there's a reason to question the strategies in the mobility plan. In fact, many of them, I think, were of a nature that they were even beyond what we were planning at that time. As Hassan says, a lot of us looked askance at some of the things Bonnie was saying we should be doing, and now we're hearing are the kinds of things we need to be incorporating. So, but I think we should be moving forward with the components of the transportation mobility plan, because that will continue to be the foundation. When we do come back and visit the specific plan, any modifications of that, it will just put us in better stead so that when development does come back, we'll be ready for it. I've been very concerned, especially with the last iteration of projects, that they were really ahead of the mobility plan and many of the things we need to implement to have been able to talk about things like in lieu parking fees and a downtown transportation plan. We have an opportunity to be ready now for whatever the next wave is going to be. So we need to do that while at the same time we address the entertainment center concern. And I agree with Hassan. I think it fits in very neatly with the overall vision for the downtown, especially the whole urban pedestrian-friendly environment that we're trying to create. The issue of numbers of units aside, I think, though, that does create the kind of a attraction, an amenity, a sense in the downtown that it becomes a very urban-friendly downtown area, which is something that clear back to the what do we call the thing we did back in the Yeah. Well, the East Broadway was one where we created a neighborhood, but even clear back to the downtown strategic plan done before I got here. It talked about creating that kind of an environment in the downtown area, and this really just kicks that whole thing up another notch in a different area, given what we're seeing from this kind of new wave of what the future economy is going to be.
Okay, Ms. Friedman.
Thank you. First, I wanted to thank staff for the presentation and for all of the hard work that they've done, as well as our commissions, and particularly Transportation and Parking Commission. There's a lot of moving parts to all of this, and a lot of pieces, and it's a big plan. So I know that it's a lot to deal with for everybody. So I appreciate the focus on it. First, I do want to just express a little concern about the wayfinding signs. I know it's a very small piece of what we're looking at today, but I do have a concern that in a time of limited resources, I don't want to get into a situation where we put time and money into doing a series of signs that in a year, when we have our new branding program, we decide are obsolete. So that's a concern, and I want to be very sure before we spend even staff time that it wouldn't be more prudent just to wait until North Star really gets into it to be sure that, you know, we're really utilizing our resources in the best way that we should. Whatever we put up, I don't want it seen torn down in a year and redone. In terms of the mobility plan, I'm very happy to see this go forward. This is something that I've been interested in for quite a while. It's been a little frustrating for me to see it kind of stall along the way. That was my perception from the outside before I was on this council, that the city had spent a lot of time and money on the mobility plan and instituted very little of it. I'm a big proponent of in lieu fees for parking. It's impossible to think that we can grow our downtown and then expect all of the people that are either occupying those office spaces or occupying those residences to be driving to work every day and parking. If that's the assumption, we can't grow, because clearly we're at a point with regards to congestion and our infrastructure with the street sizes that we have that it would be impossible to just keep dumping more and more cars into it. So the in lieu fees are very important because they provide a funding source for what we really need, which is a very good, very convenient, and user-friendly public transportation and alternative transportation methods in the downtown. That's really what I would like to see the mobility plan focusing on next, is doing whatever we can to de-emphasize parking and to emphasize alternative and public transportation. To me, that's the key to everything. It's the key to a livable city, it's a key to the type of downtown we want, and it's also a key to growth. So I was very glad in the staff report to see a little bit of emphasis put on bicycles, and I just wanted to take a moment, if you'll indulge me, to sort of explain to the public why I've been talking so much about bicycles, because I think that it's probably some people out there are mystified by this. When I've been talking about bicycles, I want to be very clear that it's not in the context of recreation. I'm not seeing what we're doing in terms of bicycle amenities to be part of the parks program. It's not something that we're doing because it's a nice way to get exercise. For some people at least, bicycles can provide an alternative method to get to work. If you're someone living at the New Broadway Lofts Apartments or in a lot of places in Glendale, and you're a young urban professional and you're working in Glendale or at Disney or maybe even in Burbank, it's a way that people more and more are choosing to get to work. It may not be for everyone, so why should you care about this if you're not one of those people who's going to hop on a bike? Like a lot of people watching this, I'm sure, would never dream of riding a bike to work. Well, you should care, because for every person who's on a bicycle going to work or to the grocery store or to visit their friends, that's another car that's not in front of you on the road. And that's another car that's not trying to park on Brand Boulevard. So if we really believe that there's people that will be encouraged to ride their bikes who aren't currently, because we lack the amenities and we lack the infrastructure, you should support it for that reason, because it'll clear some of the road off for you. I believe from the outreach that I've done and from the outreach that Colin Bogart, who's here for the Place Grant, has done, that there are a lot of those people out there in the community, people who would be riding their bikes to work more if they felt safer, if they had places to put their bikes, if they knew that there were bike lockers at the train station, which I just found out about this last few days. I didn't even know that. if their employers gave them incentives to do this, for all kinds of reasons. It's those people that we're targeting with these amenities. To that end, I asked staff to prepare for me an amended motion that puts a little bit more of an emphasis on language for bicycle and pedestrians in terms of this, because I felt that the current wording and what we have, at least in front of us, really doesn't call out bicycle and pedestrian amenities as much as it should. We all have that as a priority, but going forward to other councils, we need to be sure that we have that specificity. More importantly, we need to really build that into the downtown-specific plan, because developers and businesses are going to be looking at that plan as they plan their developments, as they plan their businesses, as they figure out how to deal with transportation and all of that. And by the way, bicycles is one small part of it. Really, we need to look at all types of alternative transportation. It's pedestrians, definitely buses, Beeline, the downtown circulator. That is all crucial. The public transportation and alternative transportation part of it, to me, it's all part and parcel. And it really is something that we need to put into place if we have any hope at all to grow and avoid a lot of the crisis that larger cities have gotten themselves into and are now just starting to dig themselves out of. In terms of the preferential parking, I do believe we need to look at it, but I want to also be sure that we look at some alternatives. For instance, looking at the city's open-air parking lots and looking at putting parking structures on them. I think we need to look at all kinds of alternatives like that. To the extent that we are going to have out-of-town visitors who are going to drive to our downtown, we need to be sure that they still have convenient and cheap parking, and that it doesn't become the type of situation where no one can park anywhere in the downtown. So I would like to see us look at that as we move forward. We just passed the motion out, the amended motion. I have copies for everybody here, but all it really does is it adds on to the end that implementation of the mobility study shall also include bicycle and pedestrian improvements and an updated bicycle master plan, which will be submitted in a separate scope. I just want to be sure that it's very clear that it's in the motion, that it's a priority, that we recognize that it's a key to transportation policy. So I asked staff to put this together, and thank you for indulging me, and thank you for hearing me out, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, I think it's a good idea, especially in the downtown, and even the neighborhood surrounding the downtown. It gets a little bit dicey if you live up in the hillsides, but the flatlands of Glendale multi-unit and single-family residential neighborhoods, and well, we all know neighborhoods I'm talking about. There's no question that people should be encouraged and can, in fact, use bicycles to do some light shopping or work, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a great idea. Any other comments on that, Mr. Najarian?
I'd like to hear about the current status of our bicycle master plan. If someone can address that. I know when I was on the TPC, we worked on it. We had a pretty nifty, I think, Class 2 bikeway planned throughout the city, and funding issues and funding possibilities, et cetera.
Well, members of the agency, members of the council, and we welcome the language that Ms. Friedman suggested here. I think sometimes the comments I've received is in the overall mobility plan, you don't see a lot of emphasis on the bikes, although it is part of the mobility plan. For us at a staff level, it's sort of a separate path we're taking, not under Nelson Nygaard, but a separate path we're taking with staff and other consultants who have helped us in the pedestrian and bikeway. Currently, Mr. Najarian, we are finalizing with Metro the ability to procure TDA funds, Transportation Development Act funds, in the amount of $150,000 to be able to use for our update of the Bikeway Master Plan. Our goal right now is to begin that process early summer and be done by the end of the summer. So we'll have a completely revamped, updated, revised, whatever term you want to use, bicycle master plan as we begin to enter the fall of next year.
Let me know when that application hits me.
I certainly will. We will not hesitate or be shy to talk to you about that. It looks like things are going well, so I don't know that we'll need anything else, but we will definitely keep you posted.
And those funds are earmarked for bicycle?
Well, actually, Mr. Najarian, it is not the norm to use those funds for bicycle master plans, but I will give kudos to my staff who have been working diligently to convince folks at Metro that this is a good use of those funds, and it looks like they've been able to do that. So we pursue that in a bit of a separate path, but all part of the overall mobility plan.
Starboard.
It just strikes me that we need to be sure and make sure the staff and Nelson Nygaard, as we're working on mobility in the downtown, it just seems to me the downtown is a bit of a special place as it relates to the bicycle master plan. So we need to make sure that the bicycle master plan in the downtown area is tied in with these other planning issues that we're addressing in the downtown area. You know, development standards, entertainment center. I do think we're going to spend some time and come back and talk some more about our specific plan on the downtown and how we may want to amend that, given what we see in the future for the economy and development. But certainly pedestrian bicycle planning in the downtown area has to be an integral part of that. So we need to make sure that coordinates.
Entertainment district.
Entertainment district.
Not center. We think.
District.
Possibly.
Okay, Mr. Howard?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I might want to indulge Bonnie a moment, Nelson Nygaard, on the added language, given the fact that the original motion outlined a change order under contract of $120,000 and did not contemplate some of this language. I think she's okay with some of it, but there may be an issue where that we may have to separate out into either two separate motions or bring another one back.
Can I answer? I read this as saying in a separate scope, which meant there wouldn't be part of the existing work plan.
I just want to be clear, it's a separate procurement.
And separate procurement is the key,
right.
Because there would obviously be a different budgeted item for that.
You don't even...
As long as everybody understands.
That's how I read it. Yeah. Right.
Okay. I didn't get that. Wait, what?
Well, what's requested in here is including bicycle pedestrian improvements and an updated bicycle master plan is not part of the work by Nelson Nygaard under the $120,000. That's not part of that funding. It's anticipated which will be submitted in a separate scope, meaning a separate scope of work, and in all likelihood, appropriate fees attached to that. So it's not part of the $120,000.
With that understanding, that's fine.
So that will come before us as a separate item?
Right. Yes. Right.
Separate
Exactly.
budget.
That's the TDU. Right.
All right, any other comments or questions? Okay, do I have a motion?
That's my motion, my amended motion.
Okay, that encompasses A, B, and C?
It's the
This motion
This would be
is
2C, as amended.
just 2C. Okay. All right, do I have a motion?
I'll move the item. So
The item of 2A and
2B.
2A and C, which are council
and then
items,
B
and
is a
C is
separate
amended,
agency.
and B is separate.
Okay,
It's an agency.
so my motion is for 2A and C.
As C as amended.
Okay, I need a second.
Second.
Roll call.
Council members Strayman,
Yes.
Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Weaver,
No.
Mayor Quintero.
Yes.
Why no?
Do we have a, I'm sorry.
Agency
the
motion.
agency. Yeah, we have an agency resolution at 2B.
So moved.
Second?
All right. Mr. Kasaki?
Agency members Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
No.
Chairman Draymond.
Yes.
All right.
Is there a motion to adjourn for the agency?
So moved.
Second.
Motion
Agency is adjourned.
to adjourn for the city council.
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned.